What's the scariest 100% true story you've heard of?
One of my friend's family growing up had a beach house, and I'd get invited every now and then. They had delalallers, and the house was massive, pretty cool place too. They even had a full-time maid who had her own flat at the back. One day they go there for a long weekend, and when they open the door, the place had been ransacked. It was all a mess, missing TVs, furniture, broken stuff. You get the picture. They went to check on the maid, and her flat was empty. All her belongings were gone. They called the cops, who came over and had a brief look, not interested from what they said, and left saying the maid probably had something to do with. And that's what everyone believed for a week. Until the dad returned the following weekend to try and change the locks and etc., and he brought their dogs along with him. Yep, you know it. One of the dogs started digging and found the maid buried in the backyard under a tarp they had close to the pool. So the theory now is that whoever came in probably knew her, and she recognized them, and she had to go.
I work midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner the other half of the week, and we've always been partners. So these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly. And as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay for as he walked in. He smiled and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You small girl is not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to, and that the provincial police, think state troopers if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s, early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine he fell asleep, to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all the oil and left him be because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back, so the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are.
I was around 10 years old. I was at school, but my mom told me she was thinking of taking me to the doctor's in the afternoon. Recurring eye issue. Lunchtime, and I'm in the dining hall when the office woman told me there was a taxi outside for me and I needed to go. I assumed my mom booked it for me as she can't drive. I cleared up my stuff and got my bag. Just about to leave when I remembered my jacket in my classroom. I rushed to get and head out for the taxi. Office woman tells me I'm too late, and the taxi had gone without me. I just went back to class, but panicking my mom would be angry at me. School finishes and my mom is waiting for me at the gates. I burst into tears, apologizing for missing the taxi and thinking I was in big trouble. She never ordered a taxi and had no clue what I was talking about. She ended up not making the doctor appointment. No one ever found out who ordered the taxi or who driver was. My mom doesn't like to think what would have happened if I hadn't forgotten my jacket and got in that taxi.
When I was learning to drive, my instructor advised me to always lock my car doors as soon as I get into my car. I asked her why, and she told me her personal experience. This happened almost a year after she passed her test. She finished work about 3 a.m. She'd just gotten into her car and gotten her keys in the ignition when 3 guys jumped into her car. She had a knife to her neck and was told to drive. They give her directions to an alleyway. They dragged her out of the car and R-word her. After they were done with her, they left her in the alleyway and stole her car and purse. It took her a while to get help. Police did find her car a few days later, abandoned and on fire, on the outskirts of the city. But the guys were not caught. The reason she started to teach driving was her way to protect other women and make sure no one else goes through what she went through. So she advised all her female students to lock their car doors as soon as they get in.
My uncle was in a bar one night and started talking to this random guy. He described him as a really nice guy. He met him a few other times in the same bar. They drank and talked about random stuff. Soon after, my uncle stopped seeing the guy at the bar. IDK how long after, but my uncle got notified that he had jury duty. He showed up and found out what it was for. A serial killer, and the killer was his friend from the bar, Derek Todd Lee. My uncle was promptly dismissed from jury duty for obvious reasons.
In the 1990s, a nurse in New Jersey unalived hundreds of hospital patients. Sometimes he would sneak into patients' rooms at night and inject them with fatal medication doses. Other times, he would put the medication into IV bags in the supply room so they would kill whatever random patient they were given to later. He was accused several times. Some patients pointed him out before they died. Some staff thought he was creepy and dangerous and refused to work with him. He kept getting fired from hospitals. But the hospital managers knew that if he got arrested, they would be sued by the families of the patients he murdered. So they just fired him and didn't call the police. That happened at 12 different hospitals over the course of 16 years. Investigators believe he killed as many as 400 people. After he was arrested, he confessed to 40 murders. In 29 of them, he gave enough detail to be charged and plead guilty. He is linked to 300+ more deaths than that, but details of those will probably never be known, because so much information was lost over time or destroyed by the hospitals.
My college girlfriend called me one night. The Baton Rouge serial killer had been active a while, and she was being followed, all over town and even after going in circles, by a wild truck, which the killer supposedly drove. She fit the victim profile. She was brunette living in, house-sitting for her aunt, a wealthy neighborhood. My roommate and I drove over and we filed in line behind her in the Triuc. She lived essentially on the LSU grounds, so I assumed it was a stupid student prank or something. She parks at her aunt's house, truck stops one house short of her aunt's, and we pull in behind her. I explain I'm going to go defuse the situation. Walk over to the truck. The FBI says the killer is a white guy. This man is African American. Explain no one is upset, but he's freaking out my girlfriend. He needs to leave. He looks side-eyed at me and drives off. I see the guy again a few months later. On the cover of the Baton Rouge paper, he's been arrested. He was the killer.
There's an abandoned house in my town. Some dude inherited it after his aunt died. He's just leaving it to crumble. But that's not the scary part. So this lady took in every stray cat she found, and she was good to them. They were always fed and healthy and brought to the vet often. She was nice, to anyone who was nice to her cats anyways. She'd sit outside in spring and summer and nice autumn days. So when winter rolls around and she's nowhere to be seen, people think nothing of it. Then spring comes. People realize she's not out, and after a week, concerns arise. A wellness check is found and the cops get into the house. They say the place stank of cat piss and crap, and there was a lingering smell of decay. They walk around noting trash not taken out and stinking, cat carriers with tags on in a spare room, and then her room. They open the door and find her on her floor being eaten by the cats. She was long dead and decaying by then.
Up to this day, I'm still looking for a logical explanation to this. This happened in 2003, so I and an ex were checked in a coastal resort where the cottages were far apart, like 200 meters away. Around 11:30 p.m., while we're both drinking beer with the lights turned off and only the TV on, the doorknob suddenly rattled violently, like someone was forcibly trying to get it open. There was no double lock on the door, so my first reaction was to jump from the bed and block the door with my weight. The force of my landing must have been heard from the other side, but the twisting of the doorknob continued. By this time, I was already pressing my face to the floor, trying to estimate how many people were outside the door via the small gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. There was nothing, not one pair of feet or anything. But the doorknob just kept rattling. I should point out that the gap between the floor and the door was enough for me to see the outside, or at the very least notice any change in shadow, Wankcher's light caused by movement, but there was nothing. The turning of the doorknob then stopped, but I never heard any footsteps or any other noise. Waited a few minutes and opened the door. Everything was quiet. No footprints outside or on the sand surrounding the cottage. We just noped out of there immediately. Scariest true story is something I saw happen. A man disappeared in front of me. I was at a summer camp and my group was returning to our dorms later in the night. 5 or so people. As we were stumbling up, a man in dark clothes was walking towards our dorm and we called out to him. Never got a good look at his face. But there weren't many adults at the camp, and this guy was. Starts off into a dead sprint and disappears into a large shrub of bushes. Me and my buddy had ran after him thinking he was a fellow camper. Rushed into the bushes about 5 seconds later at most, and nothing. He disappeared. The closest building was not accessible from the back where he went towards, and a smaller bathroom. The area behind it was woodland and it was completely illuminated. You make a lot of noise running through woods as well. He completely vanished. No way we wouldn't have spotted him in some fashion. Everyone was weirded out. Still can't explain it at all.